Daniel Reed was 57 years old, and for most of his life, people had seen him as a man untouchable by failure. He had built his fortune in finance with a blend of discipline, clever timing, and sheer force of will. The empire he created was the envy of many. Towering glass buildings bore his company's name, and his very presence in a boardroom was enough to sway investors. For decades, Daniel Reed wasn't just a businessman. He was a symbol of power. But power is fragile when it rests on trust, and Daniel was about to learn that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. It began on an evening that was supposed to be about family. Daniel, his wife Anna, and his son Ethan had been invited to his younger brother Michael's mansion for dinner. Michael had grown wealthy too, though nowhere near Daniel's level. But tonight, Michael seemed unusually proud, his laughter louder, his toasts longer. The long oak dining table was filled with relatives, business acquaintances, and few close friends. Glasses clinked, plates shimmered with expensive meals, and candles glowed warmly. But beneath the surface of elegance, Daniel felt something off. As the meal went on, Michael raised his glass and smirked. "Servants don't belong at this table," he said casually, loud enough for everyone to hear. His words dripped with mockery, aimed directly at Daniel. The room froze. A fork dropped. Anna's face turned pale. Ethan's fists clenched under the table, and whispers rippled through the guests. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. His younger brother, the man he had guided, supported, and even financed in the past, had just humiliated him publicly. Daniel forced a smile, but inside, his pride burned to ashes. A man who had commanded respect his entire life had been reduced to the subject of his brother's ridicule. What cut deeper than Michael's insult was the silence that followed. None of the guests defended Daniel. Not even his wife or son dared to speak. The power Daniel once held, the authority that silenced rooms, seemed to vanish in that instant. As laughter picked up again around the table, Daniel excused himself and walked to the balcony. The city lights glittered below, mocking him with their indifferent brilliance. He replayed the moment in his head. For decades, he had been the one in control. Now, Michael had struck a wound that no financial loss could match. His pride, his dignity, his identity. That night, Daniel realized something terrifying. His empire wasn't as secure as he thought. The humiliation at dinner was only the beginning. Days later, rumors began swirling in the financial world. Daniel's name was being whispered in offices, questioned in boardrooms. A sudden wave of distrust spread like wildfire. Banks that once begged for his business became hesitant. Investors delayed deals. Daniel tried to shrug it off, but the timing was too suspicious. It felt coordinated, almost as if someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. Every empire has cracks. For years, Daniel's enemies had waited for him to falter. But what Daniel didn't know yet was that the person loosening the stones beneath his feet wasn't an outsider. It was Michael at home. Daniel became restless. He couldn't sleep. His study was filled with crumpled papers, glowing monitors, and files spread across the desk. Anna tried to comfort him, but her words felt empty. Ethan watched his father crumble and felt powerless. Daniel wasn't afraid of losing money. He had lost deals before and recovered. What terrified him was losing respect. The man who once walked into any room with unshakable confidence now felt doubt eating him alive. One evening, staring at his reflection in the mirror, Daniel whispered to himself, "Who am I if I'm no longer in control?" Soon, Daniel began noticing odd details. A deal he had carefully negotiated suddenly collapsed because of incomplete documents. A loan application, routine for someone of his stature, was rejected for risk concerns. Old partners avoided his calls. Someone was sabotaging him. The thought of betrayal gnawed at him. His mind raced through the list of possibilities: competitors, rivals, former associates. But when the dots began to connect, Daniel felt a cold realization. Only someone close to him could have orchestrated this. And the memory of Michael's mocking smile at dinner haunted him more than ever. That night, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. For the first time in years, he felt small, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff with nothing to hold on to. But deep within that despair, something ignited. Humiliation can destroy a man, but sometimes it can forge him into something stronger. Daniel clenched his fists, his voice steady but filled with fire. No one humiliates me and walks away. He turned on his camera, recording himself, not for business, but for the world. His voice carried both pain and steel as he spoke. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people closest to you, if you've ever had your pride stripped away by those you trusted most, subscribe now, because what I'm about to reveal will shake you. My story isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, survival, and revenge. This was no longer about finance. It was about reclaiming his dignity, about exposing the truth, and about teaching his brother that some debts can't be paid with money. They can only be repaid in suffering. The fall of Daniel Reed wasn't the end. It was the spark of a war that would change everything. Michael Reed had always lived in the shadow of his elder brother. Growing up, he had watched Daniel build an empire while he struggled to find his own path. At family gatherings, Daniel was praised for his discipline, his brilliance in finance, his ability to turn a small opportunity into millions. Michael, on the other hand, was the afterthought, the younger brother with charm but no backbone, the one who lived on Daniel's generosity. For years, envy festered inside him like a hidden poison. On the surface, Michael was supportive. He laughed at Daniel's jokes, celebrated his successes, and even raised toasts in his honor. But behind the smile, he hated him. He hated the way their parents compared them. He hated the way investors ignored him. And he hated the way Daniel carried himself, as though he owned not just businesses, but people's respect. That hatred turned into obsession, and obsession turned into betrayal. It started quietly. Michael, using his access to some of Daniel's accounts, began manipulating numbers. A small adjustment here, a forged signature there. Nothing too bold at first. He needed to study Daniel's weaknesses, understand where he was vulnerable. Daniel trusted him, after all. In his arrogance, Daniel believed blood was thicker than money. That was Michael's opening. As weeks turned into months, Michael became bolder. He created shell companies under false names, companies that siphoned funds from Daniel's empire. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore became the resting places of millions that Daniel didn't even realize were gone. On paper, everything looked fine. Daniel's empire was still intact, still gleaming with success. But beneath the numbers, rot had set in. The brilliance of Michael's betrayal was its timing. He waited until Daniel was distracted with a series of large acquisitions, deals that demanded his attention. While Daniel was traveling, meeting investors, and preparing for expansions, Michael planted bombs in the financial records. He knew exactly how to make it look like Daniel himself had made reckless decisions. Then came the execution of the plan. Daniel walked into his office one morning to find a letter on his desk. It was from the bank, an official notice of debt. $50 million. Daniel blinked, reading it again, his heart hammering in disbelief. This had to be a mistake. His empire was stable. His accounts were balanced. How could he suddenly owe such an astronomical sum? He spent hours combing through documents, cross-checking ledgers, calling financial advisors. Each call ended with the same response. Mr. Reed, the numbers don't lie. You are in debt. The realization settled like a storm inside him. He hadn't miscalculated. He hadn't made a foolish investment. Someone had engineered this collapse. And every breadcrumb trail, every faint signature, every quiet transfer led back to Michael. Daniel wanted to believe it wasn't true. After all, this was his brother, the boy he had protected as a child, the man he had supported with loans, the family member he had defended countless times. But denial was a weak shield against reality. Michael's betrayal was too obvious, too precise to be a mistake. The pain wasn't just financial. Daniel could have survived the loss of money. What shattered him was knowing that his brother had chosen greed over blood, envy over loyalty. Every memory of shared childhood, every laugh, every drink they'd had together now tasted like poison. News spread quickly. The media latched onto the story, portraying Daniel as reckless, careless, a man who had gambled and lost. Investors who once begged for his presence now ghosted him. Friends who had benefited from his wealth vanished overnight. In just a few weeks, Daniel Reed went from being a financial titan to a fallen king. And Michael, he thrived in the chaos. He smiled in boardrooms, whispered lies about Daniel's supposed mismanagement, and positioned himself as the irresponsible Reed. With Daniel weakened, Michael stepped into the spotlight he had always craved. He bought luxury cars, hosted lavish parties, and flaunted his new wealth like a man who had finally claimed his rightful throne. But deep down, Michael knew the truth. His empire was stolen, not earned. Still, he relished in Daniel's downfall. He relished in the whispers, in the way people now came to him instead of his brother. For Michael, betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about power, revenge for a lifetime of being overlooked. Daniel, however, was not a man who accepted defeat quietly. At first, he spiraled, long nights, no sleep, drowning in frustration. He stared at Michael's face on magazine covers, burning with fury. He watched his wife Anna struggle with humiliation, his son Ethan clench his jaw at the mockery directed at their family name. The betrayal cut into his soul, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But even in the darkest hours, Daniel refused to let Michael's treachery be the final chapter of his story. The more he replayed the betrayal, the more determined he became. He would not just fight back. He would take back everything Michael had stolen and make him pay for every sleepless night, every whisper of doubt, every ounce of humiliation. Michael thought he had won. He thought betrayal was enough to bury his brother forever. But what he didn't realize was that he had awakened something inside Daniel Reed, something far more dangerous than ambition. He had awakened a thirst for justice that could only be quenched by revenge. And for a man like Daniel, revenge would be priceless. When a man falls, the world doesn't always offer him a hand. More often, it offers him a contract. Daniel Reed discovered this cruel truth when Victoria Hale entered his life. By the time she appeared, Daniel was already staggering under the weight of Michael's betrayal. The humiliation, the loss of trust, the looming debt, his once unshakable empire was crumbling around him. And like a vulture circling a wounded lion, Victoria came at the precise moment he was weakest. She arrived in his office one cold morning, uninvited but not unexpected. Her reputation had always preceded her. Victoria Hale was known across financial circles as a woman with no conscience and no mercy. She had built her fortune not by creating companies, but by dismantling them, buying broken empires, stripping them to their bones, and selling the pieces for profit. She was the kind of predator who thrived on others' misfortune. Daniel was seated at his desk when she walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor with calculated precision. She wore a black suit that radiated authority, her eyes sharp with amusement, as if she had already won before the game began. Without asking, she placed a folder on his desk and slid it toward him. "I believe you'll want to see this," she said smoothly. Inside were documents that made Daniel's stomach churn. Financial records, transfer slips, signed contracts, all pointing directly at Michael's fraud. The evidence was undeniable. His brother had forged deals in Daniel's name, funneled money through ghost companies, and left Daniel holding the debt. Everything Daniel suspected was right there in black and white. Daniel's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Relief surged through him. Finally, proof that he wasn't insane. Proof that he wasn't incompetent. Proof that the downfall of his empire wasn't his fault. But before hope could solidify in his chest, Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "You see, Daniel, your brother's betrayal is my opportunity." He looked up at her, narrowing his eyes. "What do you want?" Her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Simple. I bury this evidence. No one will ever see these documents. In return, you sign over the remainder of your assets to me. The real estate, the remaining company shares, even your personal holdings. You'll walk away quietly. Dignity intact, reputation salvaged, at least what's left of it. Daniel stared at her, stunned. You want me to give you everything? Not everything, she replied coolly. Just everything that still matters. It was a devil's bargain. On one hand, if he refused, she could release the documents publicly. The media would devour the story. Daniel Reed, the fallen titan, destroyed by his own brother. His reputation would be beyond repair. But if he agreed, he would lose the very empire he had spent his life building. Either way, he was being strangled. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of years pressing down on him. For decades, he had played the game of power and money, believing he was untouchable. Yet here he was, cornered by a woman who hadn't built her wealth, but had mastered the art of stealing others. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Don't think of it as a loss. Think of it as survival. You can walk away with your reputation. People will forget the details, and you'll live out the rest of your life in peace. But Daniel heard the unspoken words beneath her polished tone. I win. You lose. Anger burned in his chest. To be betrayed by Michael was one thing, but to be toyed with by Victoria, a woman who feasted on ruins, was unbearable. Yet, as much as he wanted to stand up, tear the papers, and throw her out of his office, he couldn't. Not yet. He had no cards to play. She held all the leverage. Victoria knew it too. She rose from her chair, smoothing her jacket. You don't need to answer now. But don't take too long. In your position, time isn't a luxury. She left the office, her perfume lingering in the air like the scent of victory. When the door closed, Daniel's mask of control crumbled. He slammed his fist against the desk, fury coursing through his veins. He had been cornered, betrayed, mocked, and now threatened. His empire, his pride, his very identity, everything was slipping away. That night, Daniel sat in the dark of his study, the folder still on his desk. He stared at it for hours, replaying every word, every smirk on Victoria's face, every memory of Michael's betrayal. His mind screamed at him to give up, sign the papers, save what little was left. But his soul refused. He was Daniel Reed, a man who had clawed his way to the top when everyone said he couldn't. He had built his empire brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. To hand it over to a vulture like Victoria was worse than death. As dawn crept through the window, Daniel whispered to himself, "This isn't over." Victoria thought she had him trapped. Michael believed he had destroyed him. But both of them underestimated one thing, Daniel's will. A man who has lost everything is dangerous, not because he has nothing left to protect, but because he has nothing left to fear. And Daniel Reed was no longer afraid. Daniel Reed had never felt so broken in his life. Nights stretched endlessly as he sat in his study, drowning in papers and silence, staring at numbers that mocked him. His empire was gone, his reputation shredded, and the betrayal of his brother Michael gnawed at him like a constant wound that refused to heal. The humiliation replayed in his mind. Michael's smirk at the dinner table, Victoria Hale's cold voice offering him a devil's bargain, and every replay fueled his fury. Yet fury without direction was useless. Daniel knew he was standing at the edge of ruin, and one wrong step would push him into a darkness he might never escape. But hope often arrives from places we least expect. For Daniel, that hope came in the form of his son, Ethan. Ethan was 28, determined and sharp, though he had never fully lived up to his father's towering shadow. Where Daniel was a lion in boardrooms, Ethan had always been the quiet observer, the one people overlooked. But in Daniel's darkest moment, Ethan refused to stand aside. He had watched his father's empire collapse, watched the humiliation bleed into their home, watched his mother Anna suffer in silence. Ethan's love for his father transformed into something more powerful, resolve. One evening, as Daniel sat in his chair with a glass of untouched whiskey, Ethan walked into the study, carrying a box of old files. "Dad," he said firmly, "we're not finished. Not yet." Daniel glanced up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Ethan, there's nothing left. Michael has taken everything. Victoria holds the rest. I have no proof, no leverage, nothing." Ethan placed the box on the desk, dust rising from the forgotten records. Then we'll find something. You built this empire from scratch. There has to be a trail. No fraud is perfect. Michael's arrogance will be his undoing. For the first time in weeks, Daniel saw fire in his son's eyes. The same fire he once carried in his own. Something inside him stirred. Something he thought had died. Together, they began searching. Hours turned into days. Days into weeks. The house became a war room. Ethan sifted through decades of documents. Old contracts, bank statements, archived deals, records long forgotten. Daniel guided him, pointing out patterns, inconsistencies, places Michael might have tampered. Anna brought them food, but most nights the plates went untouched. The work consumed them. Then, one night, Ethan found it. Buried in a stack of financial statements was a discrepancy, small, almost invisible. A signature that didn't match Daniel's handwriting. A transfer made on a date Daniel had been in another country. Ethan pulled out more files, and slowly, piece by piece, a trail emerged. Michael had been sloppy. His greed had made him reckless. And in his arrogance, he had left behind proof. Ethan spread the documents across the desk, his voice trembling with excitement. Dad, look. These aren't your signatures. These accounts, half of them don't even exist. And this, he pointed to a sheet. This shows money moved into one of Michael's personal holdings. It's all here. He hung himself with his own rope. Daniel picked up the papers, his hand steady for the first time in months. As his eyes scanned the evidence, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Relief and rage fused together inside him. After weeks of despair, he finally had what he needed, proof. Michael thinks he's won, Daniel said quietly. He thinks I'm finished. But this is the turning point. Ethan leaned forward. What do we do now? Daniel set the papers down, his voice low but firm. We plan. We don't just fight back, we destroy him. Brick by brick, deal by deal, lie by lie. And when it's over, he'll wish he had never crossed me. From that moment, father and son became allies in war. Daniel taught Ethan strategies he had never revealed before. The art of leverage, the psychology of negotiation, the way to turn an enemy's strength into weakness. Ethan, with his tech-savvy skills and relentless energy, uncovered more digital trails, more hidden accounts, more forged documents. Together, they crafted a case so sharp it could cut through steel. But beyond the strategy, something else was being rebuilt, their bond. For years, Daniel had been the untouchable patriarch, and Ethan had been the son living under his shadow. Now, they stood side by side, not as father and son, but as equals fighting for survival. In the darkness of betrayal, they found light in each other. Every night, as they worked, Daniel felt his strength return. He was no longer the broken man humiliated at a dinner table. He was once again the strategist, the builder, the lion. And with Ethan at his side, he was more dangerous than ever. By the time their case was complete, Daniel had everything he needed. Irrefutable evidence of Michael's fraud, a timeline of deception, and records that could not only clear his name, but destroy Michael's forever. He poured himself a drink, this time raising it with a steady hand. Ethan, he said, his voice filled with pride. You've given me back my fight. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about us. About this family. Michael thought betrayal would end us, but it will be the very thing that makes us stronger. Ethan nodded, determination in his eyes. Then let's finish this. Daniel leaned back, staring at the city lights through his window. For weeks, those lights had mocked him, shining indifferently as he fell. But now, they looked different. They looked like a battlefield waiting to be conquered. The turning point had arrived. The hunter was ready to become the hunted. And Michael Reed was about to learn that betrayal has a cost far greater than money. It has a cost measured in ruin. The city skyline gleamed with ruthless ambition, a reminder of everything Daniel Reed had built, and everything his brother Michael had stolen. For months, Daniel had lived in the shadows, gathering proof, sharpening his blade in silence. Now the silence was over. He had the evidence, the strategy, and most importantly, the fire in his chest that betrayal had ignited. Michael thought the game was finished. What he didn't know was that Daniel had rewritten the rules. The night before the final confrontation, Daniel sat with his son Ethan in the study. The desk was covered with neatly organized files, hard drives, and contracts that could turn boardrooms into battlegrounds. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but burning with anticipation. "Tomorrow changes everything, Dad. After this, Michael won't have anywhere to hide." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he looked at the documents. "He destroyed my reputation, my empire, and thought I would crawl away in shame. But tomorrow, Ethan, we don't just win. We make sure he loses everything." The next morning, the shareholders' meeting of Reed Global Holdings opened with all the glitter and pride Michael had orchestrated. He wore a tailored suit, his smile as polished as the marble floor beneath his feet. The boardroom was full, investors, lawyers, journalists, and power brokers. Michael was ready to cement his throne as the new king of the empire. Daniel entered quietly, dressed in a sharp navy suit that carried no sign of defeat. Whispers rippled across the room. Some thought he was finished, others believed he was desperate. But Daniel's calm, unshaken stride silenced the noise. He took his seat at the far end of the table, directly opposite his brother. Michael's smirk widened. Well, Daniel, I didn't expect you to crawl out of the shadows. Have you come to watch me make history?" Daniel leaned back, folding his hands. His voice was measured, icy. "History will be made today, Michael, but it won't be yours." The tension thickened. The chairman gestured for silence as Michael began his grand speech about growth, profit, and his vision for the future. The room applauded politely. Then Daniel stood. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice carrying like a strike of thunder, "I have evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal committed by the man who sits before you." He held up a file, thick with documents, and slid copies across the table. "Every signature forged, every account manipulated, every dollar stolen, it's all here. And it all points to Michael Reed." Gasps erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Investors flipped through the documents, their faces shifting from doubt to shock to fury. Michael's smile faltered, his confident facade cracking like thin ice. "This is nonsense. Lies. You're desperate, Daniel." But Daniel wasn't finished. He gestured to Ethan, who connected a hard drive to the projector. Screens lit up with bank transfers, emails, and security footage that showed Michael signing deals under forged identities. The evidence was irrefutable, damning in its precision. Every secret Michael thought buried was now flashing before the room. "Here," Daniel said coldly, pointing at one transaction. "You moved $10 million from company accounts into your private holdings. Here, you used my signature when I wasn't even in the country. And here," he paused, his eyes burning into his brother's, "you orchestrated my downfall to crown yourself king. But kings built on lies don't rule for long." The room erupted in outrage. Board members demanded explanations. Investors slammed their fists on the table. Journalists rushed out to break the story. Michael's empire was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Michael rose to his feet, shouting, desperate, "You can't do this. I'm the head of Reed Global now. Everything is mine." Daniel stepped forward, his voice a quiet storm. "Not anymore. As of today, you're stripped of every title, every share, every ounce of power you stole. The same board you manipulated will now watch you fall. And when the courts are done with you, Michael, you won't be walking out of here a free man." Security guards moved closer. Michael's eyes darted wildly, sweat dripping down his temple. You can't ruin me. I'm your brother." Daniel's face hardened, years of hurt boiling into his final words. "A brother protects, Michael. A brother builds, stands, and fights with you. You were my brother. You were my betrayer. And today, I take back everything you tried to destroy." As the guards escorted Michael out, his protests echoing down the hall, Daniel stood tall in the center of the room. Reporters swarmed him, cameras flashing, but he ignored them. He wasn't doing this for headlines or applause. He was doing it for redemption, for his family, and for the empire he built with his bare hands. Ethan walked up beside him, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it, Dad." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice firm but softened with emotion. "No, Ethan. We did it. This victory is ours. And never again will I underestimate the strength of standing together." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city, Daniel stood at the window of his reclaimed office. The skyline no longer mocked him, it bowed to him. The empire was his again, cleansed of betrayal. But more than wealth or power, he had reclaimed his dignity, his family, and his future. For Michael, ruin was just beginning. For Daniel, the final revenge was complete.